If I were to include every detail and nuance about the Amityville story, the crime, the trial, the Lutz family, and those who lived there afterwards, this would be a 7-part series. So, in the interest of time, we're going to take a 10,000-foot look at the events that took place at 112 Ocean Avenue in 1974, focusing only on the main characters. What we do know is 6 members of the DeFeo family were brutally slain under its roof, and just about a year later, the Lutz family moved in, claiming to face forces that were beyond human understanding. The bizarre part of this tale is that the worst parts of it were only the beginning. In the early morning hours of November 13, 1974, Ronald Butch DeFeo Jr., just 23 years old, walked through the quiet halls of 112 Ocean Avenue with a .35 caliber Marlin rifle. In a matter of minutes, he shot and killed 6 members of his family: his father, Ronald Sr., his mother, Louise, his 2 younger brothers, Mark and John, and his 2 younger sisters, Dawn and Allison. Each victim was found lying face down in their beds. There were no signs of a struggle, no signs that they had even attempted to escape. What baffled investigators, and still does today, is how a rifle could be fired repeatedly in a 2.5-story house without any of the neighbors calling police after hearing gunshots. Autopsies later revealed there were no sedatives or drugs in the victims' systems. It was as if they simply never woke up. Theories have ranged from a silencer, which would not have been effective for that type of rifle, to speculation about a second shooter, but nothing concrete has ever been proven. On the evening of November 13th, after murdering his entire family, Butch ran into Henry's Bar, a small tavern located on Merrick Road, shouting something along the lines of, "You gotta help me. I think my mother and father have been shot." This stop at Henry's Bar became a pivotal moment in the timeline because it's when the murders were first reported to anyone outside the home. Officers entering 112 Ocean Avenue discovered the bodies of all 6 family members, each lying face down in their beds. At first, DeFeo told police that the killings had been carried out by a mob hitman named Louis Fellini, claiming his family had ties to organized crime. Within hours, however, his story began to unravel. By the next day, after extended questioning, DeFeo confessed to all 6 murders, telling detective, "Once I started, I just couldn't stop. It went so fast." He said he'd taken a shower, changed clothes, discarded the murder weapon, and threw his bloody clothing into a storm drain. The trial began on October 14, 1975 in Suffolk County Court, presided over by Judge Thomas Stark. The prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorney Gerard Sullivan, argued that the murders were deliberate, methodical, and committed without provocation. The evidence presented included the rifle used, with ballistics matching every bullet to DeFeo. Testimony from police and medical examiners confirming all victims were killed in bed face down. No signs of forced entry into the home. And DeFeo's prior history of violent arguments with his father, as well as trouble at home. The prosecution emphasized that DeFeo had a strained relationship with his father Ronald and was dissatisfied with his life. They contended the murders were motivated by financial gain, as DeFeo stood to inherit life insurance money. Defense attorney William Weber pursued an insanity defense, claiming DeFeo heard voices commanding him to kill his family. Weber brought in psychiatrist Dr. Daniel Schwartz, who testified that DeFeo suffered from a dissociative disorder and was unable to comprehend his actions at the time. This was the origin of the famous voices in his head narrative, the same claim later tied to the haunting legend. The prosecution countered with their own psychiatrist, Dr. Harold Zolan, who testified that DeFeo had antisocial personality disorder, meaning he understood his actions were wrong, but just didn't care. Dr. Zolan argued that DeFeo's drug use, mainly heroin and LSD, did not excuse his actions, and that he acted out of anger, not psychosis. Throughout the trial, DeFeo frequently changed details in his account, at times claiming he acted entirely alone, yet at other points alleging his sister Dawn had participated and he killed her in a struggle, suggesting at one stage that a supernatural force influenced him, and these shifting stories undercut the credibility of the defense. On November 21, 1975, after less than a full day of deliberations, the jury found DeFeo guilty on 6 counts of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 6 consecutive life terms, 25 years to life on each count, to be served at Green Haven Correctional Facility in Beekman, New York. In the years following his conviction, DeFeo gave numerous interviews, each with a different version of events. One repeating that his sister Dawn killed their siblings, and he in turn killed her in anger. Another suggested his mother was involved. Yet others hinted at a conspiracy involving outsiders, but none of these alternative accounts were supported by any evidence. DeFeo died in March of 2021 at the age of 69, never having been granted parole. George and Kathleen Lutz were a newly married couple in 1975. Kathleen, 30, was a secretary and mother to 3 children from her first marriage: Daniel, 9, Christopher, 7, and Missy, 5. George, 28, ran a land surveying business and was described as practical and level-headed. The couple had been looking for a larger home to accommodate their growing family when they learned about the property on Ocean Avenue. The house had been on the market for months due to the notoriety of the DeFeo murders. It was listed for $80,000, well below market value for its size, location, and included amenities such as a boathouse and swimming pool. Knowing the history, they brought in Father Ralph Pecoraro to bless the home before moving in. In the Lutz's account, Pecoraro reported hearing a deep male voice say, "Get out." Pecoraro later disputed that it happened exactly as described, but did confirm he blessed the house. The family moved in just before Christmas. The home came with much of the DeFeo family's original furniture, including the beds and dining room set. The Lutzes kept many of these items, believing it would help them settle in quickly. Initially, they said the house felt normal, but that would change within days. Over the next 4 weeks, the Lutzes reported a cascade of strange and increasingly frightening occurrences. Here are some of the key claims in chronological order based on their later interviews. George began waking up at exactly 3:15 a.m. each night, the supposed time of the DeFeo murders. He said he felt a compulsion to check the boathouse at that hour. Rooms developed cold spots despite the winter heating being on full blast. A small upstairs sewing room was reportedly always freezing. Swarms of flies appeared in the sewing room, despite it being December in New York. Even after being killed, they returned within hours. George became increasingly irritable, obsessively chopping wood and stoking the fire, even when it wasn't needed. Kathleen reported having nightmares of the murders, waking up screaming and claiming she had seen the victims' faces and where their bodies lay. The children began fighting more often, and George claimed they were not themselves, describing sudden mood swings. The youngest daughter, Missy, began speaking to an imaginary friend named Jody, described as a large pig-like creature with glowing red eyes. She said Jody could change size at will and sometimes stood outside her window. George claimed to see red eyes shining at him from outside Missy's window at night. When he ran outside with a gun, nothing was there, but hoof-like tracks were allegedly found in the snow the following morning. The Lutzes claimed strange odors, a mix of perfume and rotten meat, would appear suddenly and vanish just as quickly. Green, gelatinous slime was said to seep from keyholes, door frames, as well as the ceiling. George claimed to wake one night to see Kathleen levitating above the bed, while her face transformed into that of an elderly woman before returning to normal. Daniel and Christopher reportedly saw their beds lift several inches off the floor and drop suddenly. The family said doors would slam shut violently, windows would open on their own, and loud knocks would echo through the walls. On their final night, they described a violent crescendo, the children's beds slamming, foul smells throughout the house, furniture overturning, and loud deafening noises. On January 14, 1976, after just 28 days, the Lutzes fled the house in the early morning hours, leaving most of their possessions behind. The family moved into Kathleen's mother's home and refused to re-enter 112 Ocean Avenue to retrieve their belongings. Friends and reporters who went into the house afterward found no physical evidence of slime, damage, or cold spots. 2 months after they had fled the home, the Lutzes, seeking help and validation for their terrifying experiences, reached out to Channel 5 reporter Laura DiDio to tell their story. In turn, DiDio reached out to paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren, already well known from the Annabelle case and other hauntings. By March 6th, local Channel 5 News in New York organized a televised paranormal investigation of 112 Ocean Avenue. The goal was to examine whether the home was haunted with the help of both psychics and scientists. The house by then was unoccupied. The team on that day included Ed Warren, a self-described demonologist, Lorraine Warren, a clairvoyant medium, Marvin Scott, Channel 5 reporter who set up the investigation, Gene Campbell, a professional photographer, several psychics from the Psychical Research Society, and members of the Duke University parapsychology team. The Warrens entered the house with minimal prior knowledge of the Lutzes' claims, although they had heard some of the more dramatic stories circulating in the media. Lorraine later said that from the moment she stepped inside, she felt a psychic coldness and an overwhelming sense of oppressive and human presence. She claimed to sense a demonic entity connected to the property that had not been human at any point in its existence. She also reported psychic impressions of the DeFeo murders, including images of bodies in beds and a black mass moving through the house. According to her, the entity had the power to affect physical reality, explaining, in her view, the Lutzes' experiences of levitation, odors, and slime. Ed Warren said he conducted a religious provocation, using prayers and religious relics to elicit a reaction from any possible entity. He claimed he experienced a sudden pressure in his chest and difficulty breathing, which he interpreted as a sign of a spiritual resistance. He also reported psychic photographs being taken with unusual anomalies in them, though skeptics attribute these to photographic artifacts. Other psychic investigators reported feeling physically ill, experiencing sudden headaches, and sensing intense waves of anger and sadness. Perhaps the most famous product of the Warrens' visit came from Gene Campbell, who set up an automatic infrared camera on the second floor. The camera was designed to take photos at intervals while the team worked. One of the resulting images, not widely publicized until 1979, appeared to show a small boy with glowing eyes standing in the doorway of a second-floor room. The Warrens identified him as the spirit of John Matthew DeFeo, one of the murdered children. Critics have pointed out that the figure's height and clothing resemble one of the male crew members present that day, who may have been inadvertently photographed during a test shot. Following the visit, the Warrens declared that the house contained a demonic presence powerful enough to harm or even possess those living there. Lorraine advised that it would require a formal exorcism to make it habitable again. They gave numerous interviews in the years that followed, often reiterating that Amityville was the most malevolent haunting they had ever encountered. Controversy surrounded the visit, largely based on no measurable scientific evidence being gathered. Temperature, EMF, and audio readings did not show abnormalities outside of expected ranges. The Lutzes themselves did not accompany the Warrens into the house during this investigation. Some investigators present that day, including members of the Duke University team, felt that psychic impressions were subjective and could not be validated. Skeptics accused the Warrens of promoting the haunting to further their own careers, especially as media and film interest in the case exploded. Marvin Scott later said that although the Warrens seemed convinced about the demonic nature of the house, he personally remained skeptical, noting that he never experienced anything unusual himself during the filming. But word of their experiences spread quickly, catching the attention of friends, neighbors, and eventually their lawyer, William Weber. Weber recognized the story's potential to captivate the public and possibly generate financial gain. He suggested that the Lutzes consider telling their story in the form of a book. Jay Anson, a professional journalist and author known for chronicling real-life events, was brought in to turn the Lutzes' terrifying experiences into a full-length narrative. Anson spent extensive time interviewing the family, documenting every detail they claimed to have experienced. But he didn't just report the events, he transformed them into a suspenseful, immersive story, presenting it in a first-person style that made readers feel as though they were living through the horrors alongside the family. Anson's writing emphasized tension and fear, combining real events, the DeFeo murders, with the Lutzes' personal experiences in the house. This narrative technique blurred the line between nonfiction and novelistic storytelling, making the book compelling, dramatic, and deeply unsettling. In 1977, Doubleday published The Amityville Horror, marketing it as a factual account of the Lutzes' experiences. The book quickly became a bestseller, capturing the fascination of readers across the country. People were drawn to the chilling combination of a real live mass murder and the alleged supernatural events that followed. The success of the book also brought financial benefit to the Lutz family. While the exact terms were never fully disclosed, the Lutzes received an advance from Doubleday and earned royalties from the book's widespread sales. The combination of personal narrative and commercial opportunity would later fuel questions about their motivation for embellishing the story. Almost immediately, the book's authenticity was questioned. Skeptics pointed to inconsistencies in the Lutzes' accounts, while paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren offered support based primarily on anecdotal evidence. Then came William Weber's later claims. He admitted that he had helped the Lutzes embellish or invent certain events to make the story more marketable. According to Weber, some of the book's most shocking phenomena may never have actually occurred. Critics argued that the book effectively combined real tragedy with sensationalized storytelling, creating a horror narrative perfectly designed to sell. Psychologists suggested that the Lutzes may have believed in the supernatural events themselves, even if the incidents were exaggerated or fictionalized. In 1977, the Lutzes filed a $4.5 million lawsuit against Weber, freelance writer Paul Hoffman, and two magazines, alleging invasion of privacy, misappropriation of their names for trade purposes, and mental distress. In response, Weber, Hoffman, and a clairvoyant named Bernard Burton filed a $2 million countersuit for fraud and breach of contract. The Lutz's lawsuit was dismissed in September of 1979, with the judge noting that it appears to me that to a large extent, the book is a work of fiction, relying in a large part upon the suggestions of Mr. Weber. Later, in a 1979 interview, Weber admitted that he and the Lutzes had fabricated the haunting story, stating, "We created this horror story over many bottles of wine." These legal disputes and Weber's subsequent admission have significantly contributed to the controversy surrounding the Amityville horror story. That same year, the Lutzes later underwent a polygraph test administered by noted examiners Chris Gugas and Michael Rice, and reportedly passed. Critics arguing that polygraphs are unreliable and cannot prove truthfulness beyond doubt. Despite the controversy and skepticism, the book deal cemented the Amityville story in American culture. The Amityville horror inspired the classic 1979 film adaptation, dozens of sequels, documentaries, and countless pop culture references. Jay Anson's narrative style, combined with the Lutz's claims, controversial as they were, crafted a story that continues to captivate audiences almost half a century later. Whether the events described in the book were entirely real, partially imagined, or largely fabricated, the impact of the story is undeniable. It transformed a Long Island tragedy into a cultural phenomenon, blending fear, intrigue, and controversy into a tale that remains one of the most famous haunted house stories in history. Additionally, over time, Daniel and Christopher Lutz have offered varying perspectives. Christopher has expressed skepticism about certain details, though he agrees the atmosphere was oppressive and not normal. Daniel has maintained that strange things did happen in the house, though he suggested his stepfather George's involvement with the occult may have played a role. That statement begs the question, was George Lutz drawn to the occult? And could this have influenced the terrifying events he claimed to have experienced? Before moving into 112 Ocean Avenue, George reportedly had a curiosity about spiritualism and paranormal phenomena. He was known to read books about demons, psychic abilities, and supernatural forces, exploring these topics as more than just casual interest. Some reports suggest that George occasionally engaged in protective rituals, burning candles, using symbols, and other practices meant to guard against evil. There is no evidence, however, that he performed formal occult ceremonies. Instead, his involvement seems to have been more of a hobbyist curiosity. Skeptics have pointed out that this fascination with the supernatural may have shaped the way George interpreted events in the house. Ordinary circumstances could have been seen as paranormal, and his heightened sensitivity to the unseen may have fueled both his fear and the story's dramatic details. Even Ed and Lorraine Warren considered George's openness to the occult when assessing the house, suggesting that it may have made him more attuned to spiritual activity. But critics argue that this interest may have also been used to add credibility or a sense of authenticity to the haunting story. In the end, George Lutz's interest in the occult adds an intriguing layer to the legend of the Amityville Horror. Was it a genuine connection to the supernatural, or a lens through which ordinary events became terrifying? The truth, like much of the Amityville story, remains shrouded in mystery. Now, both George and Kathy have passed. Kathy in 1988 and George in 2006. And to the end, they stood by their story while allowing that what was written in the book was, quote unquote, mostly true. It's difficult to prove or disprove the Lutz's story, mainly because everything they described was purely anecdotal, and they never documented anything audibly or visually, leaving it all up to the rest of the world to decide whether to believe it or not. As far as getting rich off of it, for a while they were pretty comfortable in terms of royalties and licensing fees, but that didn't last forever. Toward the end of their lives, they were very much struggling financially. There were claims of a demonic presence possibly attached to an ancient Indian burial ground the house was situated on, which was suggested by others and never the Lutzes. The Amityville Historical Society claims the burial ground story isn't verifiable, but here in the Northeast, the majority of the region is filled with Native American burial grounds. So that's a bit of gaslighting people like to indulge in to try to explain the unexplainable. It's also worth noting that subsequent owners have never reported any paranormal activity there, and have had to endure pilgrimages from curious onlookers for decades. So was George's interest in the occult a catalyst for all of this? I say possibly, but not with much conviction. So, did they risk it all on some get-rich-quick scheme? Was there some sort of shared psychosis that permeated the house? Or were they actually tormented by a supernatural force that drove them from their home? I always try to be fair, but the last possibility is the least likely scenario, for me anyway. But the house at 112 Ocean Avenue still looms in our imagination, not just as the site of a terrible crime, but as the birthplace of one of the most debated ghost stories in our history. The endless debates will always trace back to one house, one family, and one burning question. What really happened at 112 Ocean Avenue?